Welcome to A House Divided. I'm Daniel Weinberg, sitting in the broadcast studio here at Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago, and we are honored to have Ken Burns with us today. I think he's known certainly to this audience pretty well, and we appreciate his being with us for this wonderful new book of his. Not so new, but we're showing it for the first time here. Ken, of course, founded his own documentary company in 1976, Florentine Films. He produced numerous film series, including Vietnam, the Roosevelts, and intimate history, the war, etc. And of course, his landmark series on the Civil War. He has won numerous prizes, including an Emmy, Peabody Award, and 2 Academy Award nominations. And his books range from country music to national parks, to baseball, to jazz, to Mark Twain, and more. His latest book, Our America, A Photographic History. Alfred Knopf publishes it. It's 334 pages with 251 black and white full-page illustrations and is $80. And the photographic process for the book is really superb. The deep tonality and clarity, and it's better than any of the photographs we'll be able to show you on this computer. So know that when you receive your book, it's going to wow you. The excellent quality, Ken, what is the paper stock that's on there? It's really wonderful.
I don't know the technical specifications of the paper, but it is wonderful. And I insisted with Knopf that they print in full color so that whatever degradation, sepia, or anything that had taken place to the photograph would be faithfully reproduced. So it wasn't just 2 colors, black and white. It really is an attempt to show the full range of these spectacular photographs.
Even color, when you get closer to our time, weren't some of those color photographs? Did you change them?
I made a huge decision. It was anguish. This is a project that I've been working on for 15 years at night and on the weekends, just a true labor of love. And I'm so thrilled with the extraordinary response to it. But I made a decision, a conscious decision, not to use color photography. The book is printed in full color, but I wanted to stick with black and white as the images. And what I wanted to do was to put only 1 photograph per page with the most minimal captions. So it allows your heart to see the things. And then in the back, there will be a thumbnail photograph with a description and a provenance of the photograph, so that those of us who need that kind of rational world can go and catch up. But I first wanted the experience of an old photographic monograph like Aperture magazine publishes, where you have a chance to spend some time with that work. And I suppose in concert with its partner, most of them, the first and the last, are standalones, but all the remaining ones are paired with another photograph. They're all chronological. They're all the history of the United States. Every state is represented. I think every project that we've worked on to date is represented. So there's a lot there, but it's minimal captions. It's just, Gettysburg 1863, and that's it.
Yes, notice that, and it's very powerful that way. We're going to get to many of the points that you just brought up as we go along. I heard an interview, though, where you stated, without any past, we will deprive ourselves of the defining impressions of our being. Is this book an extension of remembrance of our shared past, both from the top down and especially maybe bottom up?
I think it is, Daniel, and that's a really good question. All of my work is an attempt to try to value the past, to remove the arrogance we in the present always superimpose on the past, because we've survived and they haven't. And I wanted to extend in all the films this. The difference here is that in my films, as the director, I can let a photograph be on for 30 seconds or 3 seconds. Here, you could spend as much time as you wanted with it. So it's making the reader the director in this case, and to involve themselves with all of the kinds of compositional and artistic and other sorts of meanings that can be derived from it. And so it hits a different part of the brain than the films, which are written. They're oral, you hear them. We're trying to wake up those photographs by adding music and sound effects and voices, both third-person narration and first-person voices. So this is both a departure, but most definitely a continuation of that idea to sort of remind us that if we don't know where we've been, we can't possibly know where we are, and more importantly, where we're going.
As an historian, what role do you play, especially both film and book, and especially now with the humanities being downgraded, if not even not taught? How do you see yourself in a role model of an historian?
Well, first of all, I'm a filmmaker and I'm a storyteller, and I understand, and America has a great tradition of sort of amateur historians, Henry Adams and others in the 19th century. And I realize that I have that role, but I'm mostly a filmmaker and a storyteller. So I don't have an agenda. I'm not trying to convince you to buy something or to vote this way or that. I want to tell you a very complicated, and it's always complicated, story of American history. Facts are a very stubborn thing. And as much as we want to sanitize our past, as much as we want to whitewash it, as much as we want to say you can't do that part of that part, we've tried to be as comprehensive as we can be with the stories that we told. And this book is no different. A sense of putting your arm around. I probably looked at 100,000 images, and they're not that many, just a few hundred here. And it was hard to let this baby go, hard to work on it all those years, and then finally say, yep, no more tinkering, no more replacing. And I've already had a few come to Jesus moments of ones I said, oh, why isn't that in there?
Yeah, you could have gone through this. This is one of the reasons, by the way, I write out a lot of questions. I always fear that the author is going to answer half of them in the first 10 minutes. And we're gotten close to that right now, but I'm going to persist back to some of these a little bit later on. Now, documentaries and books on history are one thing, but history itself is another. And what is in historical studies, and maybe storytelling, as you say you are, why is the storytelling important to us today? And how does it matter? We're certainly not around campfires as we were in the good old days before George M. Cohen in caves.
Well, we may be around an electronic campfire right now, so we're at least able to reach people that we might have taken us days or months of traveling to get there. History is everything that's come before this moment, everything. But making history is editing that. Once you come home and somebody says, honey, how was your day? You edit it. You take human experience and try to put it into a story fashion. It's the basic building block of how human beings convey to one another. And if you're dealing with the past, then it is history. And storytelling and history are so close. They're made up of the same thing, plus high, which is a good way to begin a story. So I think for us, particularly today, as we begin to lose threads and connections with each other, when we begin to realize that our social media isn't social, it's made us all independent free agents, where we are self-selecting the kind of stuff we want to get rather than having broad and shared things. The work that I've done always for public television is an attempt to cross those lines and invite everyone who calls themselves an American and everyone in the world who might be curious about how we tick to visit these films and to think about us in all of our glorious and sometimes not so glorious way.
So you say you don't have an agenda, but do you have a voice? I would think most filmmakers, historians, even us healers, sometimes we have a voice. Is there an overarching theme in the book, or a voice that you at least have?
No, we definitely have a voice. You can't edit that stuff of life without essentially betraying things that you were drawn to. You know, there are a lot of pictures of baseball here. You can infer that I'm a fan of the game, which you would be right. You know, there are 5 or 6 of them, and they're important. If you had watched the Civil War series to move from this book back to a film that people might be, you'd understand that I was not a fan of slavery, and I was happy that it ended, and I was also happy that the Union survived. Right? That those are things that are pretty obvious. Other than that, you know, or that maybe the 2 villains of that series were slavery and George McClellan, who's a Union general who fed his troops well, who protected them from disease, who kept them out of battle, you know, every mother's dream of a general, but nonetheless kept them out of battle and drove Abraham Lincoln nuts, and understandably so. So I think that in the storytelling, you can't help but sort of betray certain things, but I pursue questions that have to do with essential American evergreen themes, which is why this book will be evergreen, because it's about us, not just the US, but about the 2-letter lowercase, you know, plural pronoun us. And that's a wonderful, intimate place to be. And so it's telling us, warts and all, where we've been and who we are, not just top down with famous people, but bottom up. And that's been important to the way we try to tell our stories. And so, you know, the novelist Richard Powers said, the best arguments in the world won't change anybody's mind. The only thing that can do that is a good story. So I'm in the trying to tell a good story business. And I believe that some people will be transformed and some people will be slightly transformed and others will go whatever. But I'm not asking you to vote a certain way. I'm not asking you to be for this or against that. It's just I want to share with you a complicated and rich history. So all of the intimacy of us and all of the majesty, complexity, contradiction, and even controversy of the US. It's all there, and we should be, all of us, unflinching in our ability to look at where we've been.
I'm going to go back to your black and white I was showing while you were talking before. I was showing just quick this page or that page from your book. It's black and white on black. Now, I have here, I wanted to just show this. Here's an original Hessler in sepia from the 19th century. I didn't have a platinum print to show, but they are different in that regard. You have some in your book as well that show the sepia next to the black and white. What effect is that on the viewer?
What a smart question. What a smart question. You know, there isn't a psychology to color, to form, to shape, to composition that we don't know, that our brain doesn't process or isn't quick enough to process. And that's why I want you to spend as much time with the photograph as you want to spend. You can go like this, but I'd also like you to sit with it. So I would judge when I'd have 2 different versions of a print, what I thought expressed the meaning of it the best. Was the sepia in the way, or was the sepia promoting a deeper and richer understanding it? And so, you know, in the end of the day, every filmmaker, if they're honest, will tell you it's whatever works. And being a filmmaker, sort of moving over to the book publishing side of things, it's whatever worked. And literally, I promise you, Daniel, this was years and years and years, and 250 different versions of the photographs that are here.
I believe that. So let me ask you then back to documentary. I'd like, fairly briefly though, please, I want to get onto the book soon. The difference in being a documentary filmmaker, and then moving into the book side. And, you know, your mother said that they came alive for you. You brought the dead back to life. And you, of course, with your father in the introduction, a very passionate, fascinating introduction that I hope everyone will read before they start even looking at the book, that you were fascinated by how the photograph in the dark room, your father's dark room, would all of a sudden appear. And so what is the difference to trying to get still life alive and to not only bring back the dead, but make it work there must be difficulties in each medium for that.
There are difficulties, but I think it's the same thing. Tolstoy said that art is the transfer of emotion from one person to the other. But boy, that is a simple way of saying it. That's what I'm trying to do in my film. In fact, working on my very first film for PBS, Brooklyn Bridge, I said that I was not just interested in excavating the dry dates and facts of the past, but I wanted to perform a kind of emotional archaeology. That emotion, not sentimentality or nostalgia, which is the enemy of good anything, but the higher emotions our founders thought would be released when people govern themselves, when we trusted people to govern themselves, would create the glue that would hold the dates and the facts together. So you got one thing a little bit wrong. My mother was sick with cancer and died when I was 11. And I became a filmmaker because I watched my father, build a darkroom and then, as you say, perform the unbelievable alchemy of watching a photograph come alive. But later on in my own life, I found it unable to sort of deal with my mother's loss. And a psychologist, my father-in-law, late father-in-law, told me, he said, I bet you don't remember her birth, the day that she died, or this, or you blew the candles out on your cake wishing she'd come alive. And go, yeah, how do you know? And he said, look what you do for a living. You wake the dead. You make Abraham Lincoln and Jackie Robinson come alive. Who do you think you're really coming alive? So I think in all the work, in some ways, on a personal level, for me, it doesn't really relate to anybody else other than being a little bit of trivia. I'm having a conversation with my mother, who's been gone since April 28th, 1965, which I can tell you, as a nearly 70-year-old man, is way too long to be without a mother, right? So
positively,
that's what's going on. At the same time, I'm involved in this public act of history, of communicating with people. The book, every one of the major series, Civil War, baseball, jazz, the national parks, World War II, the Roosevelts, Vietnam, and country music, as well as many of the individual biographies, have all had companion books. So I've been involved with a kind of parallel production there, but nothing in which I said, you know what, forget about any of the projects I'm working on. Let me just aggregate some of the photographs that have had meaning for me throughout my life and throughout the work that I've been working on for the nearly 50 years that I've been at this.
I'm going to take a break from that for a moment. And now that I have you here, I want to ask you this question after a little prologue. Okay, the Civil War, when the documentary, and we're a Civil War shop, the Civil War Roundtable movement began in our shop. So the Civil War is, of course, very dear to us. And people have asked me about how the Civil War progressed in our culture. And when I came in 1971, it was dead. The Centennial had killed it. But I have a theory that came up when I've been here a little while. And what I think began the process of Civil War again being intimate for many in the nation, collectors, readers, was 1977 when Roots came out. People started coming into my shop looking for their own roots. They would go and get a regimental history. My great-grandfather was in the 8th Illinois Cavalry. Do you have something on them? I gave him Abner Hard on the 8th Illinois Cavalry. And then they came back and they'd say, gosh, he was in this battle. What's Shiloh? What does that mean? Mm-hmm. I'd sell them a book on Shiloh. The 80s, Ken, became an amazing time for readers, collectors, dealers. We were all in it together, learning together. And in the 80s, Civil War exploded. So what I say is, so people say, well, Ken Burns did this with the Civil War and made it national. Yeah, but I think you threw gasoline on a fire already out of control.
Yeah, I agree. I think
now,
what
so
happened...
did the 80s, my question, I just wanted to ask you, did the 80s perform that on you? That's why Civil War came?
No.
Okay, there goes that theory.
I was a 8-year-old at the Centennial, and I was noticed that it sort of came and went really quickly, and it seemed to be about arrows on maps and regimental names and kind of that, and it didn't have the stuff that I wanted even as an 8-year-old. And I think that's what was dissatisfying for many people. But you begin to wonder, as a country gets older, and I think our bicentennial also did that, not just Roots. It asked us who we were, where we came from. And the most important event in American history is not our founding. I'm working on a film about the revolution right now, and I wish I could tell you that the most important event in American history was the revolution. It's huge. The Civil War is the most important event in our country's history. And to know who we are is to know this, is you have to know the Civil War. So all of the subjects of the films I'd first worked on, Choosing Accidentally, The Brooklyn Bridge, The Shakers, Huey Long, The Statue of Liberty, Congress, all had as this major shadow cast across their story, the Civil War, in various reasons I don't need to go into. And so suddenly I kept saying, I got to do the Civil War. And by 84, Christmas of 84, I finished Michael Shara's Killer Angels, which had gone nowhere in the 70s, but it had been given to me by David McCullough and said, you know, you might like this. And I read it, and I said on Christmas Day to my dad, I'm going to do a history of the Civil War. And he goes, what part? And I said, oh, all of it. And he shook his head and walked out of the room like I was like my idiot son. This was up in Michigan, not too far from Chicago. And, you know, I went back undaunted, perhaps naively undaunted, and did what we did. So it felt disconnected from anything other than my own personal growing sense that everything either flowed into the Civil War or flowed out from it. And that it's still true today. We look at you and I could just pick out of a hat any random topic, and it will go back to the Civil War, or it will lead up to it.
The photographs that you have here in this book, and photographs that are so important to you, do you see these photographs as artifacts? We're a shop that has historical artifacts. We deal in autographs, books, prints, statuary, ephemera, and also photographs. But do you consider photographs as artifacts? And if so, what's their role in our cultural history?
Well, that's another wonderful question. Of course, they're artifacts, but I don't consider them that way. I'm trying to take off the materiality of the object itself. And I'm also trying to do another thing. These are two-dimensional moments, arrested moments, and I'm trying to treat them as if they're alive. So I'm not only shooting these, refilming these old photographs with the master shot that the feature filmmaker I originally wanted to be before I went to Hampshire College, and the documentary filmmaker I became, a long shot, a medium shot, a close-up, a tilt, a pan, a reveal, inserts of details. All of these are the sort of the stock and trade tools that a filmmaker has. I'm listening to it. Is the cannon firing? Are the troops tramping? Is the bat cracking? You know, what do you hear here? Trust to that photograph had a past itself and would have a future. Did that cart just pass through the frame? And so this is part of Waking the Dead. This is this animation that I want to do. And there's nothing about it that's an artifact. We're trying a kind of honest sleight of hand. You know, Apple calls it the Ken Burns effect, which is very simply zooming in and out. That's not it. It's trying to will an old photograph or a painting or a drawing to life by adding to it complex things, not just a third-person narrator, but first-person voices, not just sound effects, but complicated sound effects at the level of a feature film, period music from the time that helps give the sense of what was going on, as well as how you energetically explore what is just a two-dimensional thing and try to give it that dimension in every sense of the word. And though the image isn't moving, you move physically, you know, kinesthetically, but you also move emotionally. That's the part of it. As you zoom into somebody's eyes, as you tilt down from a young boy's face to find two revolvers stuck in his waistband, you know, or tilt up from that. That's telling a story. Just the sheer reveal of that is, and you can just look at the first couple of images of the Civil War series to understand just how profound not saying anything, having music panning across a photograph can be when you arrive along a body to a dead Confederate sharpshooter in Devil's Den, or to the ruins of Richmond that looks like it's Berlin after the Second World War, not the United States of America at the end of the Civil War. That's what you want to do. It's to remove the the materiality of that artifact, even though they are, and to try to make them more, to wake up that past.
Well, then let me ask you this. My father was a psychoanalyst, so we have something in common here. And I want to ask you about the viewer's projection then. We bring something to each of these photographs. You're asking us to do certain things, how to view a photograph, how to examine it, interpret it, emotionally connect to it. But at the same time, we bring our past and ourselves to it.
Right.
So can we really have a pure synthesis with ourselves and the image, because we bring some sort of
No,
ideation that we project upon?
This is the human story. This is the human compact, and every one of my viewers of the films and viewers of the books brings something else in their own past, which are going to change the dynamics and the various meanings. That's what human communication is about. That's what storytelling is. All the books you have came from someone's desire to tell a story about something, and they did that. And then how somebody said, well, I didn't get into that. I closed it up after the first 30 pages. It was boring to me. Or I couldn't put it down. I stayed up all night. I cried when it ended. I didn't want the book to end. I slowed down my reading over the last 100 pages for that same reason. Everybody's going to have a different response depending on who they are, what their background is, as you say, and what they bring, the sum total of their history. And that's magnificent. This is the human dynamic. And unfortunately today, when we're dealing just as we are right now with ones and zeros, the computer world or the binary world of our superficial media, where everything's good or bad, red state, blue state, north, south, east, west, rich, poor, gay, straight, male, female, whatever you want to say, nothing's binary. Everything's mixed. And that's what human experience tells us. Unfortunately, we're tricked by the ones and the zeros into thinking that we can make safe, easy choices. It's either one thing or the other. And it's not. More often than not, it's neither or both. And that's a terrific thing. You know who understood that better than anybody else? That guy, Abraham Lincoln. He understood that.
We're going to get to him in a second, because you have
When
a
he
good
says
quote
the
on him.
mystic chords of memory or the better angels of our nature, he understands the dynamic of human fellow citizens. We cannot escape history, he says in one speech. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. A little bit later in that speech, he said, the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. As our case anew, we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves from that past, and then we can save our country, which he will later then say in that same speech is the last best hope of earth. So he is all over the map. His second inaugural is Old Testament. If God wills it to be, so it will be, and resolves New Testament with malice towards none, with charity for all. So I'm the lucky beneficiary of having spent my entire life trying to tell stories in American history with someone like Abraham Lincoln, able to articulate for us today, in some ways better than he did in his own times, who we are, what we're about, and what the human predicament is.
Let's bring up a photograph of Abraham Lincoln that you have in this book. You say about Lincoln, by the way, that he also helps the future. Well, we're in the future, looking back at him. So he's speaking to us, I presume?
Oh, I don't think he's consciously doing that, but I think he knew in his life that he was a vessel to receive and transmit a sense of who we are, all of our contradictions. And at the same time, he knew the timelessness of that. So I don't think he's saying there, oh, this will be good for people once I'm assassinated in a couple of months. And when America is divided again over racial things 200, 150, 160 years from now. It's just a magnificent portrait of one of the most complicated. All I think about when I see this photograph is the poignancy of what he's done and what will happen shortly, and his face so filled with everything that's taken place over the last 4 years. Walt Whitman said, "He's so awful ugly, he's beautiful."
Yes, very true. And also, I see there, maybe my projection, that he sees the future because the war is over and he knows it.
He knows
and
it's over.
That's,
and
of course, where that small little smile is.
Yep.
I wanted to bring something, by the way, because you're a photographer and like this, I'm going to show you something This is just a reproduction, digital. This is what that original photograph was.
Yes.
And the glass plate walked into our shop one day many years ago, 90s, and it was a stereo view. And didn't know that. And here's what it is. And what we've always seen is the one on the
right.
right. If you
Yep.
see, you can see a little bit of another
Yep.
book peeking out. So it could be a stereo. And this is the other side of that
It most
photograph.
definitely is a stereo, because we
Unknown.
actually considered showing it as thus, and decided that the full emotion in his face, we didn't need to distract with process or plasticity, we call it. That is the superficiality of the image. Instead, we went for the meaning. We went for the guy. We went for the look.
I'm going to say too, though, going back to the artifacts, that artifacts are all stories, just as you say.
Indeed.
We also deal here in stories all the time. Each artifact has its own, and therefore has meaning and helps define where it comes from and our understanding of it. And I think that they are alive. And if one makes it your own, looking at a photograph or looking at a photograph as an artifact or a real artifact, a different artifact, three-dimensional, it can become alive positively. I want a quick comment. This is again offhand. My father used to tell me, I've had hundreds of photographs taken of me. I've yet to see one that does me justice. So there's the other part of this. Can we look at a photograph of ourselves and really see ourselves? No, again, it doesn't do me justice.
Well, I think that's a pretty interesting thing. I say in the introduction that, we have this old cliche that a photograph is worth 1,000 words, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think with their proliferation these days, they've possibly been devalued. And the book was an attempt to try to restore full value. But you're absolutely right. There is a subjectivity to all things. My view is not what you're seeing, right? I get a different kind of set of receptions. And so too, every time a photograph is taken of us, it's only really an aspect of us. And what your father is saying is nobody's got me in the totality. And that's true. The best photographers, though, and I would suggest that Alexander Gardner came awfully close to, I think if Abe were alive today, he'd say, yeah, that was me.
Yeah, I think that you might be right on that. Although, again, everything is subjective, as you say.
Everything is subjective. The only thing that's objective is up there, right?
I hope. So let me ask you about the back of the book for a moment. We have a slide to show the Gettysburg reunion in the 1930s and the explanation, the text that we also have, just to show our viewers what the back of the book looks like. And tell us about Sarah Meister, who helped you with these. What was her involvement in producing the back of the book?
Yeah, well, this is 1913, not 1933.
Yeah, 1913,
So
I'm
this
sorry.
would have been the 75th.
We use a different one, right?
Yeah, I mean the 50th anniversary of
Right.
the Gettysburg, and here you see some old veterans recreating Pickett's charge. Sarah had nothing to do with the selection of photographs for the book. She was someone, a scholar that I admired. She worked at the Museum of Modern Art and was the curator of a very well-regarded show on Dorothea Lange, the great Farm Securities Administration photographer in the 1930s, famous for the Depression-era picture of the migrant mother in a jungle, a tent jungle in the Central Valley of California. And I asked her if she would look at the book and contribute an essay, which she did. Susanna Steisel, though, has been working with me until she retired a couple of years ago for decades. And she has been the main person looking for images. So together, she and I, and then later with Brian Lee, worked to sort of choose what it is. And as I said in the acknowledgements, I'm sure she has a, like the British Parliament, she has a shadow government of photographs that she wants that I didn't ultimately choose. But this is a wonderful, wonderful, evocative photograph, you know.
Oh, SpongeBob?
The rebel yell is
All of the
piercing.
photographs in this book are evocative, for heaven's sakes. They really, in one way or another, touch some aspect of humanity in each of us. We have one that I'm going to show because you talked about the pairing. Because each one I show from the
Yes.
book.
Yes.
What that shows. And there are
So
two
there's a
here.
really good page. That's a really wonderful page to do because you have on the left black troops, segregated black troops. You know, they were in separate barracks. They would recreate at separate bowling alleys, and their blood supplies were segregated. That's an Arizona camp. And on the right is, you know, a race riot, you know, in which people are pulling a black man off a city bus. And so you've got in Detroit. And so you've got, you know, some of them talk to each other thematically, and other them talk to them, you know, in other ways. And
these are the same year, Ken.
The same year, same thing is happening. And if you went back in the book and look at that great Timothy O'Sullivan photograph of the dead in the field at Gettysburg on the left-hand side, the verso, as we call it, the recto of that is a photograph in New York City outside a newspaper where they're posting the lists of the casualties from Gettysburg. So there's the actual dead of Gettysburg, and here are people scanning the rolls to see, is my son, is my husband, is my cousin, is my brother, is my neighbor on that list, and that was conscious. But you don't know that when you see this. It's only when you get to the back matter does it begin to reverberate and add dimension.
I would think that when we see it, it should come forth. It doesn't on every pairing, and I'm going to ask you about that too. I want to show you one other pairing though that's really powerful, of railroad trestles, and two railroad trestles used in two separate ways entirely. And I think we have that to show. And on the left, when we get it up, viewers will see a terrible moment that was in Jim Crow for a long time. Two black people hanging from a railroad trestle.
Yeah. So the left-hand picture is of a lynching.
Is a trestle of a train of a transcontinental train going toward the northwest, and there you're looking to the future.
Yeah.
On the left, you're almost looking at the past, and the right toward the future.
Or vice versa, right?
There's technology of locomotives and trestles.
Yeah, and in some ways, you know, vice versa, right? I mean, these things that are happening on the left-hand photograph continue to happen. That bridge, that rickety old bridge, would you go over on that bridge? This was an age when 1 out of every 4 bridges was collapsing. That may look like manifest destiny to you. That looks like a potential disaster to me. And we deal with infrastructure to this day. And yet you see the similarities of them. They're 2 bridges, but they're also connecting us in a way with the reality of our story. And I don't really need to say, I don't have to put the thumb on the scale. Everyone will have their own reactions to the both photographs. Yeah. But you're right. They are consciously chosen to be paired in that way because of how we put it, the architecture of the photographs, the compositional architecture.
Right. So when choosing, let's go back for a moment. How did you choose 100,000? And you talk about billions of photos. You have 100,000 to look forward to. It must have been interesting and very difficult choices. But what were the essences? What was the essence of each photo that you did choose that maybe is not in another photo? What did you look for to place 251 of them in here out of not only 100,000 but billions?
Yeah, it was really, really hard. And I'm not going to say that there isn't a better photograph outside that I would have done. It just didn't work well with the picture it was paired with. I mean, I knew what I wanted to start with, and I knew how I wanted to end. And each one of those would be separated. There would be no other, but every other one has a kind of relationship to the photograph on the side. We wanted to go chronologically. That's a great discipline. Black and white, as we've discussed. We wanted to touch every 50 states. We wanted to be able to represent some of the themes and some of the projects that we've worked on without being didactic about it or getting a plug in. We just want to say this is, just to ourselves that this is territory we covered. And most of the photographs, the 100,000, are because, for a film on country music that may have 2,500 still photographs in it, we looked at 60 or 70,000. I touched more than 100,000 photographs for the Civil War, and I shot personally myself on a tripod with an easel and magnets holding the pictures up, 16,000 photographs. And the series has nowhere near that many in it. But you needed that. I'm in New Hampshire right now. We make maple syrup, and it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. So the winnowing process for this book was painful and difficult. You wake up in the middle of the night, scratch a note and say that. And as I say, there's still some free electrons out there. I went, oh my goodness, every time there's a school shooting, which is like every other day, I realized there's a wonderful shot from Wichita, Kansas during the Wild West days, in which there's the sign, please check all firearms with the marshal when you arrive in town, meaning the original gun safety was in the Wild West, which for us is the raison d'etre for why everybody can pack a gun and use it whenever they want and hide it and whatever. And it's our history belies the kind of destabilization of the last few decades with regard to the Second Amendment.
So, in other words, gun control, the control of gun culture is in this book as well.
It's not. That photograph is not in there. That's what I was saying. It was one in which now every time there's a school shooting, I go, boy, I wish I'd put that in there. And we
so
had
why
it in.
didn't you? Why did you?
I told you
how did you decide which themes that would not go in?
We didn't want to be heavy-handed.
Gun culture is very
we didn't want to be heavy-handed.
I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So that's one thing that you decided not to do. I also, by the way, with baseball, I see the Black Sox here in Chicago, but not the 1968 Democratic Convention. So how did you decide that the 68 Democratic Convention is not going to be in this book?
You don't think that way, Daniel.
America is not going to be in this book. How did you decide those themes?
Daniel, we didn't think about that way. We didn't think about it in terms of themes. We talked about it, about the reception of a photograph, which is a much more difficult thing to describe. So we have moments where you just go, oh, wait a second. The gun thing was in, the Wichita sign was in, but it was kind of heavy-handed where it was, and it didn't really pair very well. And I'm sure we had tons of Democratic Convention stuff to choose from. I just, was in the middle for most of the production of this book, but making a 10-part, 18-hour series on the history of the Vietnam War. So it wasn't for lack of that. It's just we weren't going to be guided by kind of mental constructs or by certain thematic categories, including the Second Amendment or including the politics of this. We were more interested in how these works of art transcend whatever dynamics might be there, evergreen themes of American history, and the way they talk and communicate with each other. Again, you don't no, the best arguments won't change minds, only good stories. And so we're looking for ways to tell a complicated story about us.
Yeah. And there's so much that is our America that you can't do everything in any one book or even any one documentary.
You know what I love? Can I just tell you, Daniel, can I tell you something? On films that we've made, like the Civil War or baseball or jazz, we get a lot of criticism from people say, you didn't do this general, you didn't do this battle, you didn't do this World Series, you didn't do that thing, you didn't do this jazz player or the second musician that sat in at 3 a.m. And what you say is, that's not a story, that's an encyclopedia. An encyclopedia is not a story. And so storing necessarily requires editing, and some people have to stand in for other people, and some moments have to stand in for all moments that are similar to that. And that's the kind of thing when somebody says, honey, how was your day? You don't say, I backed slowly down the driveway, avoiding the garbage can at the curb. You edit. You say, you can't believe what an SOB my boss is, whatever it is. That's how you edit your story, unless, of course, somebody T-bones you as you come out, and then that's exactly how you begin that story. So in all cases, you need to yield to what I call the negative space of creation. There are, how many photographs in this? And there are 100,000. There are 99,750 that are the negative space of this creation. I could not have made the book without those, trying them, putting it in for a while, 6 months out, miss it, put it in, still out. Last moment, remembered something, put that in, it's still in. That's the kind of stuff we did. You know, we could have volume 10 of this book and still be talking about what I left out.
Well, yeah, I mean, just take Miller's photographic history of the Civil War in 10
Exactly.
volumes. That's iceberg, tip of an iceberg.
Exactly.
I think it is Sarah Meister who says in her essay toward the back that she describes the selected photographs as intentionally idiosyncratic. You feel that?
Yes, I think that's a good way to describe it. I didn't think about that as I was writing the book, but I realized that there is something incredibly, not dishonest, but, you know, when I say our America, it's really my America, right?
Mhm.
The subjectivity of that. But I'm trying to remind people, particularly in a time of great division, that we do share all of these things in common. We may not live in Oklahoma. We are most definitely not in any way responsible for those two human beings hanging from that bridge, but this is our story and we're part of it. And the Black Sox are as important as the beauty of the Dartmouth Common in Hanover, New Hampshire, where there's a baseball diamond, but also all the radiating paths that the students are taking to cut across. And it's like many vectors, or Jackie Robinson rounding first base, or Sandy Koufax pitching a no-hitter. These are all things. Or in this one on the right, there's the Dartmouth Common. On the left, on the right is a Japanese baseball team in San Francisco. And on the lower right-hand side is a man named Chura Obata, who would turn into one of the great artists on the West Coast in the first decades of the 20th century, and would be at the time of Pearl Harbor afterwards interned in a Japanese prison camp. And he turned his attention to his memories of his visits to the national parks to get him through. And he would draw these beautiful pictures of sequoias and redwoods that represented a kind of permanence when all of the stuff that was going on. It's very, but you know, for him, becoming a citizen meant learning how to play the national pastime of the country. And there's my favorite.
There's another one on the back.
If
on the back cover.
If the cover photograph wasn't what it is, the back cover photograph would be the cover. This is a Boston tenement alley.
I agree.
And here are recent immigrants playing the national pastime of their adopted country amidst the flowing laundry. I mean, there can't be a better baseball shot than that. And,
Yet the
and
one
for a while,
before,
I thought that'll be the cover.
Yet the one before, the Fuji Athletic Club, they were being assimilated, Japanese being assimilated into our culture. Yet right after that, they were put into camps.
And many of them were all American citizens. I mean, this is like, President Reagan paid restitution to them, reparations. Every survivor got, I think it was $20,000 for that shameful period in our history. So really, and I think I know the answer to this, but I wanted to show the cover because this is your mentor, a photograph from Liebling. And I wanted to ask you if you came to it from, at some point, did you, let me back up. I think you always came to it through the photograph. And does this photograph blend into what we're doing in this book? But did you ever, I think with Liebling, you probably went out and said, I need one of his photographs for my book. And probably there are a couple of other, like Gardner, you needed a Gardner perhaps. And maybe we have a beautiful photograph from Hugh Mangum in 1909 of three girls. It's just so spectacular. It's spectacular.
You didn't come from Hugh Magnum, did you? You came through the photograph?
No, and I didn't come through Lewis Hine or Ben Shawn or Gardner or anything. I mean, I suppose, to be honest, I knew that Lincoln thing would be in. So I guess I was subconsciously picking Gardner, but I was picking the image and the meaning of him. So I was on a television show promoting this book a while ago, a cable news thing. And someone said, so what's the most important photograph in the book? Abraham Lincoln? I said, I suppose to, but I think that the beauty of the United States is that the kid on the cover, whose name we do not know, in 1949 in New York City, holding his, coat in his arms, an improbable hockey shirt, his decayed shoes flapping, his shorts, his socks, his rakish hat in front of the beautiful bulbous curves of a car from that period. Our creed suggests that he has equal importance. This happens to be a beautiful photograph by my mentor, Jerome Liebling, who's no longer with us. And I suppose going in, I thought about, but I would have easily jettisoned that. I thought that I would put at least one photograph of his in as just a way to honor him. But if it didn't work, I wouldn't have put it in. That photograph not only works, it works well enough that it earned to me the pride of place as the front cover of the book.
I actually have an interesting autograph sentiment here from Susan B. Anthony. She says, perfect equality of rights for women and is in the demand of Susan B. Anthony. I'm sorry, I'm killing that. And you have a great photograph of her in here, but I wanted to ask you about others. We have one of Ford and Edison.
Yeah.
How did you decide which famous people were to come in? Because it was never about famous people. There's Babe Ruth, Mark Twain, Lou Alcindor, Johnny Cash, Theodore Roosevelt, Rosa Parks, no Frank Sinatra. But how did you choose from all the famous people?
We didn't choose it that way.
Because of them or
no
photograph or both?
The photograph. I mean, there's a picture of Charlie Chaplin, which most people would not recognize as Charlie Chaplin. He's a young, fresh off the boat Charlie Chaplin. And so, no, we weren't saying, oh, we have to have this. There's a beautiful shot that I picked and that Susanna Steisel picked that was a beautiful shot. And we just loved it for its natural beauty. And it turned out to be a portrait also of the poet, the first woman to win a Pulitzer Prize in poetry, Edna St. Vincent Millay. So we weren't ever saying we've got to do that. We love the gesture of Rockefeller and Edison. It's Edison's 80th birthday. John D is coming to say to Thomas Alva, happy birthday. We're two titans of this. And it's got a great vibe to it. And it's paired with another photograph, which is, I think, an important context in which the architecture of the photographs complement each other, I believe.
Yeah, the complement of the paired must have been a pleasant nightmare, but a nightmare nonetheless to try to find them the right ones.
Nightmare, a total, but you're absolutely right. Pleasant.
Besides, of course, the Black experience, which is slavery central to this book. Still, but there are, for the Civil War and slavery, there are 15-ish photographs throughout here, versus for baseball, which is a prime thing for you, many less. So Civil War was definitely a big issue, but Blacks were then, but they're Japanese, Jewish people, Quakers, Irish, Germans, and of course, Native Americans. And here we have, for the Black experience, Gordon, who's a well-known image to all of us in Civil War studies, but then Black soldiers during the Civil War. And it's because they fought so well and bravely that white soldiers began to at least respect their prowess in that regard, and saw emancipation not as bad as they thought. But then we are on the right in a later war, Blacks still segregated, as you spoke about before. But the American Indian is also a huge part of this book. And we have a series of photographs that you have there on the left. Even though it was late, it's the 1890s, it's stylized, but posed stately in their original habitat. Then in World War II, defending
World War One.
World War One. I'm sorry. And then on the right, a losing reservation land to the white culture. and a native having his hand in his
weeping.
face,
This is
crying
the
over
story of
losing.
our relations, you
This
know.
is what, right there is a panoply of the American Indian in our nation.
Well, Manifest Destiny tries to pretend that we had this beautiful empty continent, which we took and we were destined to take. What we took were other people's homelands, 300 at least, 300 nations within what is the continental United States. The Nez Perce saved the lives of Lewis and Clark when they tumbled down out of the Bitterroot Mountains onto the Columbia River basin. The Choctaw Code Talkers, not the Navajo Code Talkers of World War II that are more famous, but we were already understanding that our indigenous population's myriad languages would prove incredibly difficult for our enemies to break. And so, Native Americans in Vietnam had the higher percentage of casualties than any group at all. So the people from whose land we took and put them on, as the last picture says, onto reservations, then we took the reservations away from them, and then we constantly change something. He's weeping at the loss of his homeland.
There's so much I would like to still show, especially the photographs for those viewers. It's a beautiful book that I think you will have, as Ken is saying, an emotional attachment to. You will go through this not only for yourself, but for family members. I think it's a very fine sort of book to go through with younger people especially. And if you see something in there that is meaningful to you, share that meaning. There's one wonderful photograph in there. It's not wonderful, it's heartbreaking, from Jim Crow. When I was 8 or 9 years old, my parents took me down to Florida from Chicago on a train. I remember at this moment, waking up in the morning, taking up the blinds. We were in a station. I saw just what you have in there, a white and a black fountain, drinking fountain, two different drinking fountains, whites only, black only. It shocked me at age 8 or 9. I'd never seen that before. Maybe I was naive, but that turned me on that.
This is our experience.
But that is emotional, that many viewers here watching today, if they get into this book, you're going to have that of your own experience.
Can I tell you something that's happened? I've been getting a lot of anecdotal feedback, particularly from teachers. And I'm in New Hampshire and across the river in Vermont. There's a school for wayward kids. And a teacher there told me that she's using the book as the anchor for her entire semester about history. And the kids are enraptured with it. I heard another from a grandfather who everybody came to visit during Christmas vacation, and the grandkids were asked to pick a photograph every late afternoon and defend it after dinner. Like, just talk about it and why they chose it and what were the reasons. And they did this for 2 weeks, and 5 or 6 grandkids running around. And I love that, because that means it suddenly had a kind of life and a beating heart. That emotional archaeology that I am trying to excavate has happened. And that's really good. And you won't relate to every image, but many of them will touch you deeply, and be reminded of the power of an individual image to convey complex information without undue stuff, without the verbiage. You know what it's like to go to a museum and look at the painting, but really concentrate more on reading the little note about who the painter is and what the year was and what the title was. And we sometimes forget to just drink in what it is in front of us. And that's why I wanted to do this minimal caption, Gettysburg, 1863. And there it is. And then later on, you can go if you need to find out about it. And so these kids are now going back to the back of the book. They're going and learn and doing further reading. Maybe they'll order a book from your bookshop. That's a good thing, because what you're doing is beginning to have the kind of national conversations we've had since the beginning of our republic, when the committees of correspondence from New Hampshire to Georgia would be talking about why the Stamp Act was bad or why the T-tax was bad. And they would talk, and this is what we should do about it or not do about it. It allows us to do what we think we do now and don't really do, which is have a kind of conversation with each other among equals, because there's no communication in this world except among equals. That's it. Everybody's either looking down or looking up. And, you can't survive that way. It's just the whole democratic impulse, which is why race is such a central theme, because the guy who wrote our catechism, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, owned hundreds of human beings and didn't see the contradiction or the hypocrisy. And so we're still struggling to try to understand and come to terms and reconcile that great disassociation at our founding. That's why the Civil War was fought, by the way. And
Ken,
why
do you think that Jefferson didn't understand it?
No.
I kind of think he ignored it.
He ignored it. He said it was like holding a wolf by the ears. You didn't like it, but you didn't dare let go.
Yeah,
However, he
willfully
temporized,
ignored it.
he bought more statuary from Italy and more wine from France, but his cousin freed his slaves and urged Thomas Jefferson to do so, and he didn't. His neighbor there at Monticello freed his slaves and urged him to do it, and he didn't do it. And so, he's central in that he was able to distill a century of Enlightenment thinking into one remarkable sentence that begins, "We hold these truths." But he also reminds us of what historians call our original sin. That is to say, the toleration of chattel slavery in a country that had just proclaimed to the world the universal rights of all human beings. So that 405 years after that, 4 million Americans are owned by the other 27 million Americans, or some of the other 27 million Americans. It just doesn't work. And Lincoln understood it. So his Gettysburg Address is the 2.0 of the Declaration, saying we really do mean it, that all men are created equal. And that's been our operating manual ever since.
I hope we remember that, and this book can help us do that. I was going to ask you what, you've already explained what we can take from this book, and is there anything positive?
Oh,
You've already said it. The positive is that those children you spoke about in classes get around this book, look at it, try to understand it in their own ways, maybe with their families, talk about it, get away from their social media and look at something
That's right.
real in them, because we're part of humanity, all of us, and that's part of our human experience in America that is part of us as well.
That's exactly
well
said. And this is what it is. We can't be afraid of our history. We can't limit what that history is. Everybody can look at it. I just heard recently somebody was saying you could teach Rosa Parks, but you can't mention race.
No.
It's like you can talk about Abraham Lincoln, but you can't mention race or the Civil War. Okay, what are you left with?
Now, before we leave this book and I just want to say to the viewers that this is a terrific book. $80 well spent, and probably not a bad thing to gift to some people who might really enjoy understanding the visualness of America through themselves as well. I want to show one other. I don't want to get away from this without showing the artistic point. We've shown hangings, we've shown soldiers, we've shown dead, but there's also wonderful artistic. And I love the pairing of the natural beauty and the man-made beauty.
This is Antelope Canyon in Arizona, not far, a little bit east of Page, which those of you who know is in the upper right-hand corner of Arizona. And that other structure, alas, is the most beautiful train station ever built in the world, Pennsylvania train station, torn down for progress. And if anybody has ever ridden a train into New York City in the last 50 years, you know that it is 1/100th of the beauty. I remember as a kid, couldn't have been 10 years old, coming up from a train from Wilmington, Delaware, up to Penn State, and coming out there, this gigantic erector set. I thought I had landed in Oz. And there's kids playing in this. There's wonderful transcendence and humor and fun and natural beauty on almost every other page of this great continent.
And you have that in here. There's a lot of that in here. Some of them are not together. You have to remember one from the past, that all of a sudden you get to another one, man-made, from the natural beauty. Bryce Canyon is spectacular. And then look at man-made artistic images in here. and remember them and go back. You can go back and forth in this book.
Yep.
So you have the connectivity of the book as well. I recommend it to everyone. I recommend Ken Burns to everyone. Ken, thank you so much for being with us on House Divided here at the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago. The book will be available here. Thank you very much for signing the book plates. We don't have you here to sign directly, but we have wonderful book plates that are our own, and a Carl Sandburg logo that is ours. And you've signed those, and we'll have that in there as well. And so if you're watching this even on YouTube, we put these up on YouTube as well. Please feel free to come to us. We'll probably have a book and signed by Ken as well. Ken, thank you very much. Wonderful book. Congratulations. And we look forward to going back to the revolution.
Thank you very much. Take care now. I'm so happy to have this conversation with you.